to do good or to do harm, to save life or to destroy it. And after looking around at them, after looking around at them, all he said to him, stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus.
Thank you, Lyndon. What are your initial thoughts or observations or impressions regarding this passage?
He knew he was being watched, and he prepared his response accordingly.
He did.
He set them up to fail,
He did.
I think.
He also went into their den to teach. I mean, it's not as though he was part of the general teaching community.
Yes.
Here I am, and I'm teaching.
Can I go out in Bill's beehive?
Might as well.
No, you'll in.
Yeah, my cane's in it.
Okay, he was gonna poke the beehive.
Yeah.
Jesus was poking the beehive.
Okay. He's starting to invite the confrontation. He knows that it's coming. As I read this, I mean, he's always in control of it, as we're going to notice.
Yep. Well, and Jesus is prepared, but they were also setting him up, right? Obviously, they knew the man was there, it was the Sabbath, and they're just sitting back and waiting for Jesus to do something. So they're following him on the Sabbath, making sure, that he's not breaking the law.
Right.
But I think he's, so when he's going through these things, okay, so he's kind of getting in to really think about what the law really means. Because I think over the history, there was the law, but like anything else, it morphs over time. So now they're coming to these things that a bunch of Pharisees or whatever are interpreting it one way. And he's saying lots of pieces. Well, when you look at God's will, or what God type of thing, is healing wrong on the Sabbath. So I think he's kind of saying, let's get down to the bare bones and really see what the law means.
Right. And 2 weeks ago, we looked at how the religious leaders were so concerned because they were brought into exile for disobeying the Sabbath and other things. So when they were brought back to the land, they tried to build this hedge around here. They didn't want to get kicked out again. And as any time man does, they go overboard and they make all these crazy rules, right?
Ton of prevention.
Yeah.
They just wanted to make sure that nobody could keep the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And who gets challenged? It's not God, it's them.
Right. Right.
It's interesting, too, the way in which he did this. He didn't do it like he did other healings, where he would touch someone or put mud on the eyes of the blind man. He just told him to stretch his hand out. So who's breaking the law of the Sabbath?
Good.
I think he's also offering a different perspective. The beginning of the Mosaic law is thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not, whatever else. But they're all thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And I think Jesus is trying to get into a role where there are things we can do to improve other people. There are things we can do to improve ourselves. Why don't we start thinking that way?
Okay. Thank you. So what was the Jewish rule on the Sabbath, generally speaking, as far as activities? What could they do and what couldn't they do?
Couldn't work.
Couldn't work, right? And their definition of work was really narrow. We learned 2 weeks ago when they're going through the field and they're picking the grain and they're eating it, right? One of the things was the rule for the Pharisees was that no healing or medical work was to be done on the Sabbath unless a life was in danger. For example, if a woman was giving birth, and in this case, right, the man has what? It's a withered hand. It's not life and death. So, verse 7, what are the Pharisees doing here?
Watching him waiting to pounce.
Right. So they were doing that when Jesus and the disciples walked through the field in the previous story. They were watching. And here they're watching again. The word that they use there, it's like a word for spying, and it's like looking out of the corner of your eye. And it's only used 6 times in the New Testament. It's used with the Pharisees looking at Jesus to try to catch him. And it was also when the Jews were watching Paul. So it's kind of a sneaky, kind of like looking like one eye to catch somebody. They want to accuse him.
We also get the sense that when Jesus started his ministry, the Pharisees was following because they wanted to see what he was doing. There was a curiosity there. Maybe he is the Messiah. But now they're to the point where the purpose of following Jesus is to catch him, so they can put a plot together so they can end up killing him.
Right.
So that their whole mode of operation has changed since his first start of the ministry.
Yeah, I think that, just to build on what Lyndon said, you look at Jesus as being more about the Beatitudes, and Moses is about the law. It's either either or, they're complementary. So the Mosaic law kind of sets down the foundation, but you know, the Beatitudes about blessed are these and all that kind of stuff, I think they're complementary.
Okay.
I think that's the new add-on or whatever that Jesus is introducing.
Good. We're going to be taking a look at those for sure. Verse 8, it says that Jesus knew what they were thinking, right? So there's this spiritual concept here that I've been uncovering and really kind of thinking about a little bit. But basically in our hearts, we get thoughts all the time, right? Thoughts come and go. We get silly thoughts, we get good thoughts, we get bad thoughts. But it's not until we really internalize them and begin to purpose something in our heart that something it turns to good, right, if it's a good thing, or something turns to evil. So this thing here where Jesus is seeing them, they're kind of purposing in their heart that they're going to get him. And that's the spiritual dimension. When we make a decision in our hearts, of course, God sees all of our thoughts, of course, but when we make a decision in our hearts, we're entering into the spiritual realm right there, and Jesus can see it. He looks right into it because they're purposing in their heart to catch him, and he knows it. Okay? So it's just a really interesting thing, and we'll peel it back just a little bit more as we get going. But this is where things happen in the spiritual realm. It's when we in our hearts make a decision and chart out a course of action. That's the spirit realm. And that's what's happening right here. So what does Jesus do about that?
He gives them an uncomfortable choice.
Does.
Are you allowed to do good on the Sabbath or evil? Or
Right.
kind of throws them off. Not far enough off. But throws
Temporarily.
But he knows what's going on, and he just says what? To the leper, or to the man with leprosy, or the withered hand.
Hold up your hand. Just stand here.
Stretch out your hand.
Hold it out, right? So the confrontation is there. And he asks the Pharisees, what does he ask them in verse 9?
Right to do good or evil. There's a right to save a life or destroy it. And they're trying to destroy him. They're trying to have him say something that would get in trouble for, maybe get him into prison or have him punished.
Right.
So in a way, they're working to do evil. On the same day, he's working to help his man, heal his hand.
Right.
But I think he's getting more specific in the second portion. Is it lawful to do good or harm? Those are both general nouns, good and harm. Whereas when you talk about life or destroy life, I think you're talking about specifics. And I think that's where Jesus is getting to further, because generally speaking, however we look at the law that was handed down, any day of the week, whether it's the Sabbath or not, we're not allowed to do evil.
Basic logic, right?
Yeah, but I think what these Pharisees were trying to do is set in motion what it would take to finally get this guy crucified.
And in their minds, are they thinking this is really necessary? Couldn't it be done tomorrow? Right? So as far as saving a life, what's the extent of saving this man's life here? It's going to be a restored hand. So they're like, well, that can be done in office hours, you can't, right? You don't want to do that today.
One of the other, I can't remember which gospel it was out of, but wasn't it where Jesus was confronted about this, and he says, so which one of you would not save one of your livestock or something on the Sabbath? I can't
Right.
remember how that went, but yeah, this is obviously just, they're
Same
just looking
thing,
for
right?
anything to set them up, you know?
Isn't also like losing the forest from the trees? So, I mean, here they're looking at all this stuff that they think, and he's laying down the logic. Is it better to do good or to do harm? I mean,
Right. Because their laws had become so restrictive, they couldn't do anything, right?
Well, isn't it also an accusation to the Pharisees? Basically, he's telling them, that are you doing evil or do we do good? And are you destroying this man's life, allowing his hand to be shriveled, or do you want his life restored? So he's actually accusing the Pharisees of just this, that they are doing evil.
How do they respond to that in verse 11?
I don't think it
No, they weren't happy with it.
They got ticked off.
Take
They
a
got
look.
furious.
Could somebody, read that. Could you, Vito?
But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus.
So that word furious right there, it's like a mindless rage. It's irrational anger. It's only used twice in the New Testament. The healing indicates that Jesus has been authenticated by his Father, right? God is healing sinners, those that quote unquote break the Sabbath. It's got to be really frustrating. The rage is the seat in the intention for evil that the Pharisees have allowed into their hearts. So let's remember what happened, and this is a spiritual concept. Basically, they purposed in their heart, they've made a decision, and Jesus can see that in the spiritual realm. And what happens? This rage, this fury just comes out of it because they've allowed that to enter into their hearts. And Jesus is going to talk about that in the Sermon on the Mount. He's going to talk about guarding your heart for that stuff that comes in. But because they've allowed this in, this rage and fury just comes right out of them. Have you ever seen anyone, or yourself perhaps, where this rage just kind of comes out of yourself or someone else? You've seen it, and it didn't make any sense.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
in a car, by chance?
Yes.
I was waiting for that, David.
And maybe we say, he's not in his right mind. Or we say, what got into him? I've seen that in myself. I've seen it in other people. And a lot of it is something's going on in the spiritual realm there. There's been a decision that's been made in a heart, not in line with the kingdom of God. And the flesh, the rage, fury, and other forces are coming in too, because it doesn't make any sense. It's out of this world. Yeah.
Well, let's face it, Jesus did that for a reason. He could have done this anytime he wanted. He did that just to get them riled up, right?
He's reinterpreting.
To make a point.
He's reinterpreting the law.
And the thing that's interesting, which a little footnotes was in, I thought about, makes sense, is that by him not, and they emphasize, he did not touch the man. He just spoke a word, and on the Sabbath.
Good point.
Which technically, he didn't break the Sabbath.
Exactly.
And
That's a
now
great
they're
point.
wondering, how did he do, even if it was a charlatan, and he didn't go near him or anything, boom, there it is. It's how do you go after?
He didn't do any work,
He
right?
didn't do any work.
He spoke.
Literally, just spoke.
He didn't lay hands on him?
Permitted to speak. on the
Yeah,
Sabbath.
good, Bill.
Makes sense.
So he's really got, no wonder they're full of rage. They can't nail him to the wall. They really want to.
Well, isn't it so ironic that the Pharisees are accusing him of destroying the law and breaking the law, and then in their hearts they're plotting murder?
Right.
That's kind of a big one,
Yeah.
So it's that irrational thought in the midst of the fury, where you know, it's the speck in you, the other person's eye and the
Yeah.
plank in your own, and they just, you know, they're blind to it.
That's gonna come up in chapter 6 right now.
Yeah, Bill, to your point, you said that, mine, the footnotes, it says, Jesus pointedly did not do anything in the situation that could be called a work. He did not even touch the man, but simply spoke a word. And then, nor did the disabled man do any forbidden work, for he simply stretched out his hand.
Yeah,
So neither one of them technically broke the,
exactly.
right, good point.
Like you said, the Pharisees had it already in their heart that they wanted to do Jesus wrong.
And Jesus, you know, in his divinity, he can see it. He can see it. And, I mean, sometimes we may see it too, if the Holy Spirit allows us to see it. I don't always see it, but he can see it. He knows what's going on.
This Sabbath law, though, is even in effect today for a real Orthodox Jew. When I was young, I grew up in a neighborhood and it was really mixed, and we had an old Jewish couple that were extremely Orthodox. They would not even turn a light switch on. They used to
Right.
pay one of the kids in the neighborhood to come and turn the light on.
Right.
The newspaper boy would come, they couldn't touch money on the Sabbath. They would say the money's on the table, because he came to get his money for delivering the newspaper that week, you know, on a Saturday. And the wife wouldn't cook, she cooked the day before, they couldn't
Right.
cook, they couldn't do anything. It's like
Hmm.
extremely strict.
You can't push an elevator button.
No, that's
They
true.
have, they have the Sabbath
Yeah.
elevators that go up every second floor and you, without touching.
Yeah?
And you could take it up to the 20th floor. If you're living on 19, you could walk down the ones.
We talked about that,
later.
yeah,
Oh,
2
wow.
weeks ago.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I shared a story of a Orthodox Jew that called him to ask him to come over and turn the air conditioner on. So you're gonna hit, you know,
Yeah, dial
Night
phone,
bug.
but,
Yeah, it's considered
Kinda s-
work. It's-
Yeah, I
it's
know.
work, you can't, yeah.
so great. Any other thoughts as we close this section before we look at the selection of the 12?
Well, just one thought, and that's the, you know, we're looking at the extreme that they can't do anything. And then you look at the other extreme, and we tend to fall on that side. Well,
Yeah.
you know, I'm only gonna rake the leaves, right? Or, you know, I'm only gonna get some painting done, because that, you know, that there is, I mean, obviously, it's one of the 10 Commandments, honor the Sabbath. And we tend to be on the other extreme, at least personally I do, you know, and not necessarily truly taking the day off, so. I think there is a balance somewhere.
I tried to, but Gretchen won't let me.
So
I don't want to do anything now, come on.
You know, you're too busy coaching the Giants, come on, I mean, let's.
So we mentioned
Oh, they got
it
that
a
one?
couple weeks
Yeah.
ago, but what does the Sabbath rest look like for
Free this
us?
season.
What is the purpose of the Sabbath, and what does it look like for us?
To worship and praise God,
Okay.
church, and commune with Him, and commune with fellow Christians.
On the seventh day after creation, God rested.
Yeah.
So it's this concept of recreation, recreating. What does that look like for us? How might we do that to get our batteries charged? I need to do it.
Go fishing.
Okay.
I-
What else?
I like the phrase, I did not make it up, but somebody said, from Monday through Saturday, I chase happiness, and on Sunday, I slow down and let it catch up to me.
I like that.
that was
I
good.
said, I like that.
So good.
It's very good.
Stop and reflect on what you did that week and allow God to show you, you know, what he taught you and, you know, his presence. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess the real question was the original intent was to have definitive, in other words, like, the ones that say you can't do anything, even with the air conditioners is something, that's obviously taken to one extreme, other people would take it to the other. But is it something from an individual standpoint? In other words, is there one size that should fit everybody? Or is it an individual thing in terms of taking, you know, rest?
It's a great question. What works for you, Ron?
What?
What works for you?
Well, I'm retired, so
You're in the Sabbath
Every
rest.
day is Sunday, Ron, that's what I say when retirement comes.
But isn't it walking away from your desk, you know, and not attending to those details and the routines of life that you get caught up in, just kind of leaving it and reflecting, you know? Yeah. It's something to think about, right?
changed in the past 40, 45 years.
I used to play golf on Sundays, you
I'd
know,
like to
get away from it
experiment
all.
and try to do it Sunday. I'm just thinking, as a group, see if we could consciously do it as a group. See, could we do a Sabbath, pick a Sunday? The only problem is, you can't drive, so we can't get to church this way or walk.
Don't walk.
Some of us are pretty far away,
Yeah.
you know, but the concept is a discipline.
Yeah.
It's an absolute discipline to do that.
It is, and I think for each one of us, we kind of know when we're not resting and honoring God because we're wrapped up in our stuff, right? And we're just moving. And that's the stuff we want to leave and say, no, I'm not going to do that today, man. You know? So, I mean, I know that people that work, clergy, they get a Sabbath rest on a different day because they're working on Sunday, right?
I try not to go shopping on Sundays.
Okay.
And when I do, I silently say, I'm sorry that I made you work. And if it were my choice, the stores, I don't care if they're open or not, nobody would go.
Right. I try never to go shopping. I
I
just.
was thinking,
So that's not
That's taking it to
Sabbath
an
rest.
extreme.
Well, if you think about it, George, years ago when you were young, what did we have in Connecticut? We had the blue laws.
Blue laws, everything was closed. No liquor stores, no.
No, nothing.
Every small
And-
stores were
and
closed.
The only thing that
I
was
remember
open
that.
would be a pharmacy.
One pharmacy in the area.
Yeah.
One
Okay.
pharmacy,
And
and
they
and then it would be
rotated.
like the stores that had, bakeries would be open till noontime.
Mhm.
People would go to get their bread or rolls
Sure.
or whatever. It was a lot nicer world, I'll tell you that.
No, I know, I remember growing up like that. No stores were open on
No.
Sunday.
No?
Nope.
The other reflection of that is in cities, probably more so than in the rural areas, there was another group of people who were closed on Saturday, but they were open on Sunday.
Sunday, right?
Muslims.
Hmm.
Yeah.
The Hobby Lobby is that way. They do not open on Sundays.
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A right down the street.
Yeah.
It can be done.
Good, something to reflect on, you know, when we get home. It's like, you know, what am I wrapped up in? What do I need to leave so that I can listen to the Lord and reflect on, you know, on Him? So, good. Let's read the next passage, which is verses 12 to 16. Can somebody read that?
One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor.
Thank you, Vito. Those words weren't too hard, right?
No, there's definitely much better 21st century words, names and stuff like that.
So what are your first thoughts and observations as you take a look at this?
Well, I imagine Jesus was praying to God to help him decide on which apostles and disciples to pick.
Yeah.
Doesn't say
Whole
what.
paragraph
Yeah.
dedicated to 12 people that would have a great impact on the world.
Absolutely,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah. And they're often called the 12. In Greek, it's the dodeca, when he talks about the apostles, the 12.
Is this a recognition he couldn't do it all himself?
Okay.
You know, you move from a one-man show to build a corporation or whatever. I think this is, all right, I need a little bit of help.
Well, I presume he knew that he wasn't going to be on earth for long, so he needed to have somebody to follow in his footsteps to do that. Otherwise, he would be stuck here, and he could do a lot more. Like you said, you know, I can do a lot more when I'm raised.
Curious. Simon Peter. I'm looking at the names. I mean, a lot of these are English names.
Mm-hmm.
Levi was actually Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't mention that before. They had his name.
Right.
Now, on this page here, they call Simon was a zealot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was actually Peter.
No,
No,
it was a different Simon.
Different one. And we'll kind of take a look at each one in a little bit. Any significance with the 12? What is the number 12?
12 tribes of Israel.
Okay.
Tribes.
Good. And in Revelation chapter 4, there's a picture of the throne room. Do you remember what is in the throne room?
12 seraphims or
Well, 12
Sure.
cherubs.
cherubs.
There's 12 and 12, actually. There's 24. So 12 would probably represent who and who?
The 12 tribes and the 12 apostles.
Right, the patriarchs, probably,
patriarchs.
and then the disciples.
Disciples.
There's also a notion that just, the apostles would be over each one of the tribes and be there for the judgment.
Yes.
But in actuality, the tribes were over each, obviously each one of the tribes, but when the disciples, then they spread out to the, kind of like the corners of, I mean, they,
Yeah, the heathen.
right?
They
So,
did.
I mean, even though they represent the 12 tribes, they actually, with the taking and convert the Gentiles, they had a broader scope, right?
Correct. And that was God's plan, right? Through Israel, all the nations would eventually be blessed.
So he's replicating the model on a bigger
Yes.
scale, right?
Yes, good, good. How did Jesus prepare for this, the selection?
To pray.
All night long?
Yeah, and the word there, it's like, it's nowhere else in the New Testament. It's an all-night prayer vigil. It's the only place it's found, and it's a communion with God. And remember, this came right after his opposition. So he had a confrontation, and now he's moving into a time of prayer. And that's a good model for us, right? I mean, if you're going at it like this, it's time to get away, get your Sabbath, and, and spend some time with God. Mountains are a place where God typically reveals things. He's going up on the mountain like Moses did, right?
Do you think that, I mean, so if he goes up to the mountain, he says, okay, I mean, he's had a bunch of disciples, he had way more than 12.
Yes,
probably at that
correct.
time. So all of a sudden, he comes down here, he says, okay, 12, you're my key fellows. There had to be a bunch of people that weren't the 12, I would think, some type of, jealousy, or maybe that they've been overlooked or whatever. So I'm wondering if the episode before was kind of get them to maybe, get those people to think maybe about the bigger picture.
Right, so there was a large following, so there's all these people that are learners, they're disciples, and Jesus is selecting the 12. Eventually, they're all going to be martyred, so they may think about that, going back.
Which was in the Chosen, wasn't when he said that Peter was going to be the rock.
Right.
Some of the, and I don't know if that was true of it, but even the other 12 were a little bit kind of, right?
Right. They squabbled a lot.
So we'll look at in detail, but basically amongst this crowd, if we stand up and look at the apostles, you got a fisherman, you got a tax collector, you got a political revolutionary, you have a skeptic, and a future traitor, and they're all together. I know the Chosen shows some good conjecture there as to how they might interact, but you could imagine, even outside of the Chosen, some of the conflicts that they're going to have, right? And they're going to continue to develop, and it's just like us in the church, right? I mean, it's not much different. We're all different. Can you think about the tax collector and the one that is the zealot, right? He's against the government, and you got one working for the government, and they're right there together. So imagine that. So what are apostles?
Teachers,
Yes.
messengers.
Yes, messengers. And they're typically, we're going to see that they're going to be sent out eventually, so they're going to be vested with the same authority that Jesus has, right, as they go out. So the word apostle means one that is sent out, right?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But I'm just saying, it's interesting, when you go through the professions of the people he chose, then you go through the professions of the people he didn't choose. Like, you don't get the sense there's no farmers on the thing, right? I mean, I know he's done some stuff with centurion. I guess the zealot could technically be considered maybe a soldier or whatever.
Mhm.
But, I mean, in terms of tradespeople, I mean, he's got tax collectors and fishermen and stuff. I don't know, it just, maybe they had certain skills and he was looking at the personalities. What I'm saying is, it just, there's some big parts of the population that,
I think it's more like what God said when he chose David. He says he looks at the heart and not the stature of the
well, I'm not
of
even
the
saying
person.
stature, just, you know, you find somebody, a farmer that has heart, you know, I'm just.
Yeah,
I don't know, I'm just saying, I'm just thinking it's kind of interesting that, you know, I think there was a couple of tax collectors and there's a bunch of fishermen. So maybe those, they figured those also had the skill set that he needed, I don't know.
But also think about where it is.
It's the
mountain.
region,
It's
yeah.
along the water.
Yeah.
It's a trade route, so that's why you have a lot of Romans. So I'm sure there's a higher concentration of fishermen and government officials.
They
That's
also-
what I was thinking,
They
yeah.
also had, all probably had a strong conviction that there was going to be a Messiah. I mean, I don't think they were just a bunch of heathens or atheists in this group. They were raised to believe there's a Messiah coming. They probably prayed in general, not knowing that this is going to be the Messiah.
And that was the buzz, right? That in this era, people had an expectation that something was going on.
Something's gonna happen.
Yeah, they kind of
Someday.
felt it, right?
Were any of these, do you know, disciples of John the Baptist?
I don't know. That's a good question. But we're going to see his disciples, you know, interacting with Jesus' disciples.
Right, right.
And
Yeah, I
The
think
joke-
I think Andrew and Philip were disciples of John the Baptist.
Who was it?
I think Andrew and Philip
Were they?
At least that's
Thank
what the
you.
chosen.
Oh, okay. I missed that one.
Yeah, because they're the ones that told
Right?
Simon about
Okay.
Jesus, to come and see Jesus.
It might be conjecture.
Yeah, it might be, yes.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So let's see. The qualifications to be an apostle was to be a disciple with Jesus during his earthly ministry. They were all eyewitnesses to the resurrection, and they had to be called and commissioned directly by Christ. There's other apostles, right? Matthias took the place of Judas. We have Barnabas and Apollos. There's about 25 that are listed, different names that we may not know. Barnabas and Apollos are very, very, very well known.
What about Paul, Saul?
And Paul, absolutely, absolutely. So verse 14, it mentions James and John. A couple comments. They are most likely Jesus' cousin. It's believed that their mother Salome was Mary's half-sister. A lot of conjecture here, different pieces, very little scripture to back it up, but names are mentioned and trying to put the pieces together, right? John's gospel does not list Bartholomew, yet he does mention Nathanael grouped in with the disciples. Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not cite Nathanael as one of the 12. Different names, yes.
This is not heresy, so don't take it as
But we've done it here
Stand back,
before.
Get ready.
Move away from Bill.
Lightning
Fast
bolt.
Lightning's coming
The
down.
one thing they don't mention is Mary Magdalene, who was part of the group and whose name is mentioned more often in the Bible
Yes.
than his apostles.
Yes.
Mary Magdalene.
Oh, yeah, right.
She
Well-
was with the crowd.
Right, she was one of the followers. Why was she probably not selected? It's kind of obvious, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but I'm just saying,
Sure,
you don't say.
sure, absolutely,
But she was the first one to see Jesus risen.
We won't
exactly,
get into it. Just leave it at that.
exactly.
Move on.
George, my text,
Yep.
brief aside, it has a note, there's several different lists, but all of them have Peter first and Judas last.
Okay, good. And Peter's a key individual.
Of course.
He's really the leader of the group, you know? In verse 15, right, in a previous study, we saw that Matthew is probably another name for Levi, the tax collector, okay? And Thomas, also known as Didymus, also called the twin. What's his other name at the end after
Doubting.
Doubting Thomas, right?
I wonder if he looked like Jesus.
The what?
I wonder if Thomas looked like Jesus. Maybe that's why they had to have Judas. That determined who he was when it was time to
Okay,
give him up.
yep. Interesting.
Otherwise, they may have arrested the wrong guy.
Body double.
Tradition has it that Thomas went to India or Persia after the resurrection. There's a Gospel of Thomas. It's not accepted in the canon. It's interesting because I was flipping through some books. There's a lady that I think about often. Her name is Elaine Poggle. She's a professor at Princeton, and she did a lot of research on the Gospel of Thomas and wrote a book about that, and I read some of it. She was a very evangelical Christian as a child, and she had and when she was 14, one of her close friends died, and he was Jewish, and the staunch fundamentalist evangelical church just wrote him off, and it really wounded her heart, and she took a different path. And I think about her often, and whenever I do, I just pray for her, because she was so offended by that church that just sent this Jewish boy to hell, in their words, and that she left evangelical faith, and that was really, really sad.
Didn't Father Nate say about in India, I think it's up near Kashmir, where there's a Christian group
Yes.
that goes back, they can trace the history back to around the time of Thomas or
Yes.
something like
It's
that?
in the southeastern portion of.
Oh, then I guess it's not Kashmir.
No, it's the southeastern portion.
Yeah.
So a couple of the other ones here, we have James, the son of Alphaeus. His identification is uncertain. Some people say that Jesus is Jesus' half-brother, but that's probably not true, because his brothers really didn't come to faith until after the resurrection. They were kind of right on the outskirts saying, what is he doing, you know? Some say that Matthew is, some say Matthew's brothers Levi may have also been called the son of Alphaeus. We just don't know. Then you have Simon the Zealot. He's a nationalist Israelite before joining Jesus. I wonder if he carried a sword, you know?
He did.
He did.
Chosen.
In the
Chosen, yeah.
They use some moves too.
He could climb a wall.
I missed a lot of this. Verse 16, we have Judas, the son of James. Again, not Jesus' brother. We also have, he's also called Jude, son of James, to differentiate him from Judas Iscariot. And what do you think about Jesus selecting Judas Iscariot?
He knew what the prophecy had to be.
Right.
So
Fulfilling
Yes.
the
he picked
prophecy.
and selected his assassin,
Right.
literally.
Right, so we'll take
Well,
a look
he's
at
a traitor, I
those.
mean, he
A traitor, like,
Yeah.
Take a look at those prophecies in a minute. But this is really a divinely guided process, and it's providential to fulfill prophecy. You know, Jesus is God, but he's man, and he's, you know, when did he know this? Did he? I don't know. But he's being moved by the Spirit to select this man. So there's a couple prophecies there. Could somebody read Psalm 41, verse 9? And somebody else, if you could look up Zechariah 11, 12 to 13.
All right, Psalm 41, 9 is, even my close friend whom I trusted, he who shared my bread has lifted up his heel against me.
And it's also quoted again in John 13, 18, the same thing. So King David wrote this psalm, and here's an example where David was probably referring to a close acquaintance that he had where the fellowship had been broken, and he's speaking prophecy simultaneously, you know. And David, you were looking up Zechariah, I think? 12 to 13. Somebody you got
I
that?
it, yeah.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
told them, if you think it best, give me my pay, but if not, keep it. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they value me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them to the potter at the house of the Lord.
Okay. So in Matthew 26, the chief priest gave Judas 30 pieces of silver to hand over Jesus. And how was he betrayed?
With a
With a kiss. That's always the most painful thing, when you're betrayed with a kiss. Exodus 21:12 says that 30 pieces of silver is the price paid to the owner of a slave that has been killed. So if I was a landowner or whatever, and somehow somebody else's slave was killed, it was my fault, I'm to pay 30 pieces of silver. And what did Judas do with the silver after he had remorse? He didn't have repentance. Different word. He had remorse. What did he do with the silver?
He threw it back to the Pharisees, and they went and bought potter's field.
Yeah, he threw it into the temple and he hung himself. So his name is really debated, Iscariot. So there's three possibilities. The first one is most likely. It's probably a region in Judea outside of Galilee. This made Judas Iscariot the only non-Galilean of the 12. Others have said that the name comes from the Aramaic term which means false one. It's probably not true, but people are reading into it after the fact. And the Latin derivation of the name is called dagger man or assassin. So I think they're reading back into it and they want to say something, but he was probably from a region that was outside of Galilee. Any other thoughts or comments or questions on the selection of the 12?
This seems hard to believe, if his name was Dagger Man.
Yeah.
I don't think it's true.
I mean, I know a dentist is Dr. Payne.
Yeah, right.
Stay away from him. Right?
Yeah, no.
We had two sales guys, Cook and Steele.
So that's the 12. So we're going to move on to the Sermon on the Mountain, also called the Sermon on the Plain. So let me give a little overview. There's a lengthy discussion as to whether the account in Luke is the same as Matthew. A lot of people are saying, is it Sermon on the Mount or Sermon on the Plain, or is it in the side of a mountain? And there's several discussions about that, but they're not really worthwhile having, I don't think. There's difference in the Beatitudes between Matthew and Luke, which we'll look at a little bit. Most scholars believe that it's the same event. It's a major public event. There's quite a crowd that is coming. There's his disciples, there's followers, there's insiders and outsiders. They're all coming in. Let's read the passage, and then we'll take a look a little deeper. So the passage is 17 to 19 to start. Could somebody read that?
Sure. He went down with them and stood on a level place. A large crowd of his disciples was there, and a great number of people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, and from the coast of Tyre and Sidon, who had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. Those troubled by evil spirits were cured, and the people all tried to touch him, because power was coming from him and healing them all.
Great, thank you. So what are your first thoughts as you read the introduction right there?
Nobody had listened to Jesus when he said, please don't tell anybody.
Very good. Very true. It's the same today, right? If you tell somebody, don't tell anybody, what do people do?
They tell somebody.
Tell everybody. Human nature. Anything else that you see right there?
Well, it's interesting how the people try to touch him, It goes back to the story of the woman that touched his cloak, and he said, who touched me,
Yeah.
And then it also goes back to our first reading about the man with the
Shriveled hand.
shriveled hand.
Yeah.
He didn't touch him, so.
Yeah.
I think to go beyond the obvious that I said, what the word that's getting out Jesus is a person who can heal people, and they want to be healed. So there's a beneficial result of going to see him and listen to him and to meet him. And that is, instead of sitting on the side of the road begging, I can go and be a constructive member of society.
Yeah.
Do some work, take care of the family, whatever else. it is.
But they're looking for the physical healing. They don't know that he can provide spiritual healing.
Okay?
Correct, but it's also a mental feeling because they're feeling better for themselves.
Yeah.
And if Jesus is going to preach something a little differently from the Pharisees, but the people as a whole are getting a benefit, if I can call it that,
Sure.
they're going to listen to Jesus, not the Pharisees.
What's interesting, Vito, it says that, he healed people of their diseases, but then it goes on to say, those troubled by evil spirits were cured.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah, so
interesting.
there's the spiritual piece, right?
Right.
So they were troubled by evil spirits. So I wanted to look at that word right there a little bit, troubled or troubling. It's used to describe unrest caused by evil spirits, only used twice in the New Testament. And I'm going to call it troubled and troubling, so people that are troubled here. But in another place in Hebrews, it says it's used of people who are troubled by unclean spirits. And this is in Hebrews. It says, where a root of bitterness are troubling and defiling others. So it's actually, this word is used two places. Here, where people are troubled and they're coming to Jesus, and also in Hebrews, where there are people that are troubled and they're affecting other people. So I thought that was really interesting to note. And the word there, when power is leaving him, is the word dunamis, where we get the word dynamite, right? You know that. It's the power is leaving. Dynamite, dunamis.
Yeah, you do, we're talking about the intentions of the people, and I'm sure there was a full array of intentions, and some believed he was the Messiah, and was coming to meet the Messiah and be healed. Others were there just to be healed, and some were just there for the sideshow, right? Let's watch make a miracle. So the intention of their heart is really interesting, but I get kind of the sense that, that you hear the story of a drowning man. Never try to save him from the front because he'll grab you and pull you under. I'm sure there was that mentality, in the crowd, almost a state of panic, that they all wanted to get to see Jesus and be the first one healed. So I'm sure it was not just a very orderly type, process of all these people following him.
Yeah. So they weren't forming a line, right? They were coming at him.
Yeah, from all sides.
I wonder what the disciples were doing at that point.
Well,
Maybe
the chosen has them.
protecting?
Yes, protecting him,
Yes.
yes.
It's like
Yeah.
a mob scene.
Maybe that's why they selected him first, because he knew the momentum came. So you've got the 12, you've got a large crowd of other followers, then you've got the multitude of people, as David mentioned. And those, the large crowd are the people that are going to hear the message, and they're going to be given an opportunity to respond to it. And Jesus knows that. So let's jump into the, let me give you the overview. We got about 8 minutes. Give you the overview of this here. There's 5 differences between Matthew's accounts and Luke's account. So let me kind of go through those. Luke has 4 Beatitudes, Matthew has 8.
Twice as good.
Twice good, right? The order is different in the 2 Gospels. This one is kind of neat. Luke speaks in the second person, Matthew speaks in the third. So Luke would say, blessed are you, where Matthew would say, blessed are those. Much more distant. So Luke is really bringing this home. In the Old Testament, they always speak in the blessings are in the third person, those who would. It's not as intimate and direct. A lot of Matthew's gospel deals with end times and judgment. The word is eschatology, eschatological, end times, final times. So, but Luke is really speaking to encourage believers here and now. Luke has 4 woes with his 4 blessings. Matthew doesn't have any woes. There's other differences in the wording. For example, in Luke, he'll say the weepers who laugh, the ones that are crying, the weepers are going to laugh. Matthew says the mourners are going to be comforted. So just a different type of language. Luke may not have included some of the legal characteristics that Matthew did because his crowd is really going to be, it's directed to Gentiles. So a lot of the language has changed to speak. Luke's Sermon on the Plain is broken up into the following categories. There's a call to blessings and woes, which we'll maybe read a little bit tonight. There's a call to love and mercy. And there's a call to righteousness, bearing fruit, and building wisely. The Beatitudes invite us to participate in God's promise of acceptance and blessing, and those that hear it are left with a choice. So Jesus is, as he preaches, which is very indicative of preaching, you're going to be left with a choice. God is stretching out his hand to those who are in physical and spiritual distress. The idea of the Beatitudes, they're spoken to someone. Who was in the prayer workshop yesterday? Lyndon, you were there. Dave was there, right? So the first thing that Carol had us do was what? She gave us blessing people. So we were walking up to people and just pronouncing blessing. So these blessings are, it's a declaration. You're declaring someone happy, contented, blessed, or fortunate. And that was very common in the ancient world. So, it's like shalom, peace, or, the greeting would be blessing to you. Being blessed refers to a sense of inner happiness or good fortune, and that could be in religious contexts, as we're looking here. It could be in secular fortune, right? Boy, you've been really blessed, right? Or it could be an exhortation to wisdom. The Old Testament blessings appear, where would you say the blessings appear most often in the Old Testament?
Generationally, the father would bless the son.
Right.
So, but that also tied wealth and worldly.
Right. So I'm thinking, as you say that, I'm thinking about Jacob, and the blessings. And which book of the Bible would have most of the blessings that we would read? We read them every week in church.
Well, Psalms, obviously.
Right. Psalms and the wisdom literature, right? So wisdom literature are what? Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, and Song of Songs, right? Those are the writings, right? Not in the right order, but that's it. So I think what we'll do is we'll just read the first piece right here, and then we'll close because we'll dig down into it.
Just an interesting thing, when you talked about the third person and the second person, and some of that, it's kind of interesting is if you look at the gospel, overall perspective of Matthew is Jesus as the King and the Messiah, where Luke is the Son of Man. So I would think the Son of Man would be more kind of with the second person, and also would experience woes. Whereas Matthew being the, that perspective of being the Messiah and the King might have that perspective might allude to the differences.
Very good point. I mean, Luke is much more, as the Son of Man, he's much more down to earth and intimate, right? Very good. Any other thoughts? I think we'll probably be best to close there.
Luke is the third-party narrative, wasn't he?
Say it again.
Luke is the third-party narrative. Luke heard from other people.
That is true.
And then recorded it.
But he's optioning to prefer to speak in the second person. But yeah. But no, yeah, he's collecting all the information. You're absolutely right. Any other closing thoughts or comments? a lot to reflect on and meditate. You know, it's just really good stuff.
Yes. Since you speak about, since we have spoken about what is the Sabbath and what does it represent, and going back over the years, there's a gentleman's obituary in the News Times today, and I didn't see it this afternoon. His name is Philip Ginsburg.
101.
Respectfully, George, he was about your size and height.
Mm-hmm.
The last time I saw him, which was about a year and a half ago, minus about 20 pounds.
Mm.
And he used to go to the cardio rehab gym at Danby Hospital. And it was amazing to see him come in and gossip, if that's the word. Not chat, if you do in the gym. A bunch of people who familiarly at least were Christian.
Mm. He was Jewish.
Yeah,
Mhm.
very upset. And when you read the obituary, you'll see where the funeral is. But
Mm.
here's this gentleman who was relatively small, relatively living in a Christian community, can I say, Denver?
Yeah, I think so.
And he established the first legates, Rexall Drugstore.
Oh, really?
in Danbury.
And ran it until it was 93 or something.
God bless him.
So,
CVS bought it out, right?
Yeah, he made a fortune.
but all I'm asking is, in consideration of the prayers and praying for people, say a small prayer for Philip Ginsburg.
Mm.
He did a lot to support the community.
Wow. Thank you.